This that. I am consenting to, yes, I will, I consent to being recorded. It asked me if I want to be recorded, which is kind of nice. Product owner, Scrum Master, developers. I'm going to throw in another group. I'm going to call them stakeholders because I don't want people to get nervous. We got a bunch of people who are interested in what we're doing. People have ideas. I give them to the product owner. Product owner puts them on a list, a to-do list. We call that the product backlog. We refine it from time to time, putting value, effort, making sure that we split it, get it the right size, et cetera. And then we put it in the sequence. We did that on first Thursday, a week ago. We're going to do some stuff that's called story refinement. Once we know the sequence of the work that we're going to take, we're going to spend a little bit more time with the stuff that's at the top of the sequence, the things that we're going to do next. That's the story refinement piece. Once we have an understanding of the things that we are going to take next, we're going to actually then put them into a smaller backlog, a smaller batch. We call that the sprint backlog. And that's going to be the work that we can conceivably do in a 2-week period. If our Scrum, if our sprint is 2 weeks, 1 week period, if it's 1 week, et cetera, et cetera. Then we're going to start the sprint. Each day we're going to have daily Scrum. And the daily Scrum, we're going to talk about some of these ceremonies. Then we're going to have a sprint review. We're going to say, hey, this is all the stuff that we finished. Isn't it really nice? And we're going to show our stakeholders and we're going to get some feedback on it. We're going to have a retrospective saying, hey, this is what we did as a team. How can we get better as a team? That's the difference. I think somebody's asking the difference between a retro and a review. A review is for the stakeholders. The retro is for the team to get better. And that's it. And then you got this very strange person. If I'm your Scrum Master, called the Scrum Master, and that person is the person who kind of makes sure all of this stuff happens. And that's what we're learning here in this class. So really, as a Scrum Master, you need to know all of this, but it's pretty simple in some respects. It's simple to understand. It's not so easy to actually implement. So that's the Scrum framework simplified. Retrospective, then I have a couple other things that are under refinement. These aren't considered events, but I consider them ceremonies because we should make sure that we do them on a regular basis. And one is backlog. And the other one we're going to refer to as story or the items in the backlog itself. The backlog stuff we talked about on Thursday. And basically, it's everything that gets me to the sequence. What are the things I need to do to get to the sequence? Well, it's probably important that we have, that's a V, a value, an understanding of the value of the work that's there. So we do that exercise. The effort, or in some cases, the cost of the work, because value against effort tells us that these are the things I should do first. That's mathematical. It's not because Larry wants it to be. We may have some things that are too big that we want to split into smaller pieces. And then when we split them into smaller pieces, if you have an item that is too big because it can't be done in a sprint, or you look at it and say, maybe I can split this into smaller pieces, you're going to have to put value and effort against those pieces because now the original thing doesn't really exist. We sometimes call stories that are too big epics. So you may hear that term, right? This is just a nomenclature. But I'm going to do everything in this backlog refinement in order to get to this, the sequence, because the sequence is going to drive everything. And as we talked about last time, the refinement is done in advance of the next sprint. So I'm getting the sequence ready for during this sprint for the next sprint. Right? And then story refinement, we're going to talk about last, actually, because I have a whole big presentation on that we're going to probably cover on Tuesday. So what we're going to talk about today are the daily Scrum, sprint planning, sprint review, and sprint retrospective. And then I might talk about some other things that are involved with those particular issues. They're all in the Scrum guide, and you can read them. Let's start with the daily Scrum. I'm going to put that somewhere. on my chicken scratches. Who wants to tell me about the daily scrum? It's not the daily stand-up, sometimes referred to as a stand-up. Who wants to talk to me about daily scrum? We already know it's 15 minutes a day, right? What else? Does anybody want to tell me anything else about the daily scrum? Because I know I've got some people who know a thing or two about Scrum in this class, already.
So this is where you talk about what you did, what you're going to do, what's blocking you, those sort of things, right?
So that's great. I'm glad you brought that up. Sometimes we have 3 questions.
Are there any blockers?
What the 3 questions are not part of, if you look in the Scrum guide, are you going to see the 3 questions in the Scrum guide? You're not going to see it. In previous versions of the Scrum guide, they actually had the 3 questions in the Scrum guide, but they said you will ask questions to ascertain the progress of the work, and you might ask things like this, for example. So it mentions them, but it doesn't say you have to do this. So I want to disabuse a lot of folks. There's some people who are brand new. It doesn't matter for you, but there's a lot of folks who aren't brand new. I want to disabuse you of the notion that you have to ask these 3 questions. The normal standard 3 questions are, what did you do yesterday or since the last time we met? What are you going to do today? And is there any impediment or anything in your way? Right? So I know some of you are familiar with those 3 questions. This is not a prerequisite. It doesn't have to be done. Is it a good thing to do? It's good. But I'm not looking for good, am I? I'm looking for optimal. I'm looking for better. I'm looking for the best that we can be, just like the old Army commercial. So what else about the daily Scrum before I get into what we might do instead of the 3 questions? I think somebody else had a hand up. Somebody else want to tell me what else happens? It's only 15 minutes, so there's not a whole lot going to happen. No one else?
I think you asked the question, will we finish by the end of the sprint as well, right, Larry?
You can ask other questions. That's the point. The point I want to make is you don't have to do this. This is kind of a funny thing. So let me back up a second. It's much easier for me to teach people who have no knowledge at all of Agile and Scrum. It's much easier for me to teach people who have no knowledge of project management. Because it's not that project managers can't make good Scrum Masters, because a lot of them do. But I have to unlearn you the project management stuff sometimes before I can teach you the other stuff. Because once we have an idea in our head, it's hard to dislodge it, right? I think some of you know what I'm talking about. So anyways, we've got this idea that we need to ask these 3 questions, and that's basically it. And we don't want to go off on the tangents because we only have 15 minutes. So if you have, 7 people in a room, now it's a virtual room, 7's a pretty good average number, team size. You get about 2 minutes per person. That's a lot of talking. I've heard people say that this is not a status meeting, and I disagree. I think most status meetings aren't status meetings, or at least not status in the way we think. I think most status meetings are more about the status of the people in the meeting than they are the status of the work. Right? You all know what I'm saying. I'm here asking you what you're doing for me. You with me? But we know that Agile and Scrum are different in the way that we have self-organizing, self-managing type of teams, or not self-managing, but self-organizing teams. And a self-organizing team, you're not really reporting to the Scrum Master. That's one of the main differences, by the way, of a project manager, so to speak, and a Scrum Master. A project manager manages the project and they are accountable for what happens. Though I think it's pretty odd that you make a project manager accountable for a project. It's kind of like making the weatherman responsible for whether it rains or not. But that's what we do, because we do a lot of strange things as human beings, especially when it comes to things like project management. It is a true status meeting, but it is a status of the work. What are you doing, and are we moving the work forward on a regular basis? So the team, this is something that's really unusual because we tend to have a hero culture, and we have a hero culture specifically in software development very often, or in knowledge work. This is a team game. If you don't want to play a team game, don't play Scrum. Because the team is responsible for the work. The Scrum Master is not responsible for the work. The Scrum Master is responsible for making sure that the events and ceremonies happen, and that they're facilitated properly, and that they are helping the knowledge of Agile and Scrum throughout the organization. And if there's anything that's in the way of people completing their work, that they're helping them to remove the impediments that are in the way. So again, to me, it's more like a parent than something else. Your success is the success of the team, the people who make up the team, but you're not responsible for it. The team is responsible for the work. So why do I say this is a status meeting in the true sense? Because it should be the status of the work. And it's not an individual game, it's a team game. So those of you who've been to the class before, you've heard me say, I've got a problem in some respects with the 3 questions we ask that are kind of standard Scrum questions. And does anybody want to guess who hasn't taken the class why I have a problem with the 3 questions that we normally ask in the daily stand-up? You can put your hand up. Those of you taking the class, you already know. Hopefully you remember. The questions we normally ask in a daily stand-up, and this happens many times throughout today. As we speak, there are teams where there are people there saying, what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? What things are in your way? Why is that problematic for me? Because it's about the person. It's not about the work. If the important thing is the work moving through the system and not the people doing the work per se, not that I don't care about the people doing the work. We'll spend a whole bunch of time at the end talking about how Agile and Scrum is all about the people doing the work, but I'm most concerned with the value that I'm delivering to my customers. That's part of the Agile Manifesto, the philosophy behind Agile. If I'm concerned about the work, why am I talking about the worker? Why do people who say they're Agile, I'm going to put them in air quotes here, why are they forcing people to talk about what they do instead of talking about what the team has accomplished? I think it's the wrong thing because it's not the optimal thing. There is no right or wrong here unless I'm referring to optimization. There's a good way. It's a good way. We're going to know something about the work that's moving through the system, but we don't know everything, and it's not where the focus should be. Stefano, you have a question. So before I get into my next thought.
Yeah, so just to close that, then is the correct thing to focus on, instead of the you, is it to focus on the team or to focus on the results, or both?
I like to focus on the work. So thank you for the segue. I'm going to ask 3 different questions, maybe 4, maybe more. I don't know. And I do this pretty often with my teams. I have 2 teams right now that I work with on a daily basis. No secret there. One of them, we do what I'm going to recommend, and the other one, we still do the individual by individual. Because it's up to the team. It's not up to me. This is the tough part about being a Scrum Master. It's not up to me. Anything that happens as far as what we choose to do, to a certain extent, is a contract between me as a Scrum Master and the team who accepts or chooses what they wish to do. So if you're a Scrum Master and you're working with an existing team, which is the case with me, you may have 2 teams doing things that are different. Let that blow your project management mind. Because what we normally do in management is we try to make everything the same. But that's not the thing, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to control inputs. I think I was talking about this a little bit before. We're trying to control the inputs and assuming that if we control all the inputs, we'll get all the same outputs, but that doesn't work in the complex world. So what we do in the complex world is we measure outputs and outcomes, and then we assume to a certain degree that the inputs are the correct inputs. And if we want to change the outputs and the outcomes, we change the inputs. But if we don't assume that we can hold the inputs steady and continue to get the same outputs, because it's not always the case, right? In the complex world, you can do everything right and still not win. Is shorthand for it. So what do I ask instead? we do what I call walking the board. So what's going to happen is you're going to have your work and you're going to visualize your work in a visual control board. And a lot of you are familiar with it. This is where we get the, the tools like Jira. And you're going to show things usually in some kind of workflow. And it could look something like this: to do, in progress, done. And I usually have accepted in the real world. This is for each one of these stories, right? So I have stories. Sometimes we put them on cards. That's the old school stuff. The work is to do until we start it. Then it's in progress, and then we sometimes finish the work, and then we mark it done, and then we move it. I like the fourth column, which is accepted, meaning that not only have the developers done the work, but the product owner has reviewed the work and found it acceptable. Right? So that's why I add that. Some places don't do that, but I think it's a good thing to do. Have the product owner actually look at the work and accept the work. So what we will do is you will have various, stories in various states, and anything that's in progress, we will ask a question. What did we do on this yesterday? This story or this piece of work? Gosh, you can't read that. I can't even read it myself. That's why you have to listen. What did we do on this work yesterday? Because it's the work that's important. I might have multiple people, if we're doing things well, I might have multiple people working on that particular piece of work, that story. What did we do on that story yesterday? What are we planning on doing on this story today? And is there anything in the way of this story not finishing by the end of the sprint? Or is there anything in the way of this story now that we need to address? I'll ask questions such as that, because it concentrates therefore on the work. It also, because we're focused on the work tends to actually move through the system. Because one of the things that you're going to find when you work with a team is if you have 7 team members and they're used to doing their own thing, you'll have 7 stories in progress all at one time, because each one's going to take their own story and work it. That's not the way we want to do it. So I want to start concentrating on the work and seeing the work move through the system. Because one story at the end of the sprint that is done, completely done and deployable, and I could ship it to my customers if I choose to, is better than 7 stories that are half done. Right? You don't want to go to a restaurant and you say, well, we're going to cook you 7 things, but they're all half baked. You'd rather have one thing fully baked, I suppose. I mean, it's a bad example, but it's one that comes to mind, right? If I'm playing football, football is my thing, American football. If I'm playing American football, I don't get any points until I cross the goal line. Doesn't matter whether, I march down the field 80 yards or 60 yards. So actually getting the work done and delivering the value is when we can actually count it. Everything else is just work in progress, and it's inventory, it's waste. And the more things we have in progress, the less we deliver. So that's my idea with the daily Scrum, and that's it, right? Because you only have about 15 minutes. Some of the things that you want to pay attention to, this is not a status meeting where they're reporting status to you as a Scrum Master as they would as a project manager. As a project manager, they're going to report your status. You're going to update their status in some big, long tool. And then when you go into your next meeting for the next status meeting, you're going to give the status of what's going on. And you hope to God it's green. Because then you can say everything's green, and then they don't ask any questions, and you say, I'm off the hot seat. Now somebody else is on the hot seat, right? Is that project management? Did I get it right? So the team is responsible for the work. So when we get to sprint planning, and I'm certainly not going to cover every eventuality, but when you get to sprint planning, it's the team that chooses the work that they'll do, which is much, much different than work being assigned. So then they become responsible for the work, and it's going to be up to them to a certain degree. It's obviously I'm there and I'm a human being, and I could point out certain things like, it doesn't seem that Joe is engaged right now. Do we have anything that he can help out with? these are things I might point out as a Scrum Master, but me not being responsible for the work, it's really more important for me to get them to self-realize what it takes for them to work together so that they can be held accountable and responsible for the work that they are accountable and responsible for. So it's, always trying to lead people to self-realization as opposed to, hey, Joe, you're not busy. We got to keep you busy because, if you're busy, that's how we make money, which is not true. But, why are we paying you if you're sitting down doing nothing? Which is what a project manager would do and what a manager does. A leader says, hey, it looks like we don't have everybody engaged. How can we get people engaged? How can I create an environment where people are engaged? How can I create an environment where people feel that they are responsible for their work, et cetera, right? So that's a subtle difference. As a Scrum Master, your job is, they used to call it servant leader, but they got rid of that because too many teams emphasize the servant piece.
Oh, gotcha. Mhm.
So they now call it a true leader, I think is what they say if you read the Scrum guide. But basically, I think the term servant leader was fine. It just was abused. You are there to serve the team, as any leader should. Any true leader in my book is somebody who leads, from the front and not from the back with a whip. So it's up to me to continue to try to lead these people into realizing this is what we've agreed to do as a team. We've got to figure it out together. And if there's things in their thinking process or something that I can point out that says, hey, you might want to look at it this way, and that leads them to a self-realization of how to do it better, then that's what I'm going to try to do. But I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time saying, you guys are not on track to finish. I'm going to make that apparent through, the transparency of the work and what we're doing. Want to keep moving forward. Stefano, I'll take a quick one. I'm just looking at time. No, you're good. Okay.
We can ask at the end if there's time.
Okay. I appreciate it. So the other thing about the daily Scrum, I'm not going to say a lot on it. This is one of the meetings where it happens every day, right? So one of the things is the daily Scrum. There's times when you won't have it for whatever reason, but you should pretty much get people into the habit of having it every day. And the other thing is you got to kind of have, as a facilitator, you got to kind of have this clock in your head. And you have to pay a little bit of attention, not to the content of what people are saying, but are they droning on and on, or are they getting off topic and things of that nature? And can you get them redirected and focused? That's one of the reasons we ask the questions. Because if you don't ask the questions of people and you leave it way too open-ended, what they're going to do is they're just going to ramble on like I do. And now your 15-minute meeting is now 30 minutes, and nobody really enjoys it. And nobody really gets anything out of it because, we're just talking about all kinds of stupid things. For my teams, I tell them, leave the stupid things to me. I'll just, I do all the stupid talk at the beginning of the daily Scrum. Anyways, you have to be on my team to understand what the hell I'm talking about. But you have to have that clock in your head. So I always liken it to a quarterback who drops back to pass, because American football is my favorite metaphor. You got a clock in your head, because if you don't, and you don't get rid of the ball, or you don't move around in the pocket, you're going to get sacked. You're going to get hurt. So you kind of keep to that clock. The other thing is they're not reporting to you. So back in the bad old days, when we actually used to be in a room and we could see each other face to face and we actually stood up, I used to have a rule that the people had to pay attention to the other people out of respect. But I was the one every once in a while who would pull out my phone and start looking at my phone. And they said, well, why are you doing that? I said, because you're looking at me and you're reporting to me, and I don't care. I don't mean that in a bad way, but I don't care what you're doing. Your teammates care about what you're doing, because you guys are working together to try to fix this. So don't report to me. So every once in a while, I'll, look out the window or act bored or something if they start looking straight at my eye, because I'm not there for the content of what's going on. I'm there for the process. I always tell people I'm a process guy. We've got, you got 1,000 people in your organization. You got probably 990 who are looking at the content. You got to have a few who are paying attention to the process. And if I get too caught up in the content, I can't pay attention to the process. So it's a really strange kind of thing, by the way. because most of us do want to get caught up in the content. What are you fixing? What are you doing? How can you do this? Oh, you should probably use this architecture or use this tool or use this or that. You may make those suggestions as a Scrum Master, but if you get too deep into it, are you really paying attention to the process? Are you looking at how people are interacting? Not what they're saying, but how they're interacting. Is Joe being quiet? You know, what's going on over here? Well, this person said something about a problem, but now, you know, nobody picked up on it or something like that. So you're detached in a certain way, I guess. But that's the daily Scrum. Not a whole lot to say on it. Like I said, you're going to be doing it every day. It's the one you get a lot of practice at. So hopefully you get pretty good at it. The biggest problems I see are the ones that I'm trying to, you know, give you a little bit of guidance on is, one, don't let it go too long. Try to focus on some questions that help you for people to understand the status of the work, not just the status of the people doing the work. And then have some way, I always show the Scrum board, which is the visualization of where the work is. So they see how well they've done. Occasionally you might use some things like burn downs charts. A burn down chart just says, here's where we started and here's our progress. I'm not going to get into detail of them. I don't use them much anymore because it's basically, are we on track to complete what we said we were going to complete? So you might use some of those things, and trust me, if you're a Scrum Master, hopefully you're doing some research and not just relying on this class, but you're doing some research outside on what some of these things are, right? That's the big things to watch out for on the daily Scrum. But again, this is one of the easiest things, and you do it frequently, so you get a lot of iterations, and as a Scrum Master, you get a lot of opportunities to get better. Next one, let me cross that off the list here. I always like crossing things off the list. Let's talk about review next, because review is probably the next easiest one to talk about. The review, there's only a couple things that I want to say and make sure that we pay attention to. The review happens at the end of the sprint. It's where we take the work that we've completed and we demonstrate it to our customers. There's a couple of things that probably make for better reviews. It's not whether things are good or bad. It's just some things are better than other things or more optimal than other things. One, it's supposed to be about the work that was completed and showing the work to the customer. So unless your job is to create PowerPoint presentations, and that is your deliverable, you shouldn't be doing PowerPoint presentations necessarily. If you're doing software, you should actually be showing this software and demonstrating what you've made and the changes that you've made. And ideally, these changes are already in a production system. That's the ideal situation. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the ideal situation, the perfect world. You complete your work and you actually have the ability to deliver it to your customers. And you can. There's nothing stopping you, and there's a lot of companies who do this, that if, let's say you have a 2-week sprint, you finish the work in 3 days, the first 3 days, you grab the product owner accepts the work, and you can actually deliver that work. You don't have to wait till the end of the sprint if you don't want to. I'm just telling you that it may or may not, because we're going to talk a little bit about definition of done later. But you may or may not do that. If you want to deliver it on day 3, you can deliver it on day 3 to whatever environment is your definition of done environment. The other thing about the review is for the stakeholders. The review is feedback for the people who asked us or are interested in the enhancements we make. And I'm talking particularly a lot about software, but I know you guys are smart. You can map it if you're doing marketing or education, whatever it may be. I've got the product. I finished the work. This is for you who have not been with me. Your product owner, if you remember from the first day, we talked about the 4th agile principle, which is business and development must work together daily throughout the project. The way Scrum does it is Scrum has a product owner, and the product owner is part of the Scrum team, and the Scrum team is meeting on a daily basis. The product owner needs to be with the team on a daily basis. Now, we understand that there's times when maybe that's not 100% practical, but my rule of thumb, by the way, for the product owner, when somebody asks me, is that they should be available to the team 4 hours a day. It's a rule of thumb, though. If you look at how we set up, or I set up my, idealized schedule of 1 hour a day, product owner is supposed to be there for those. So I'm getting at least an hour a day. So I'm only asking for 3 more hours that the product owner is available to the team. So again, this is not for the product owner. This is for the stakeholders. And the reason that we want to have this, and I know, Jim, you got your hand up, we'll get to you in a second here. But the reason we want to have this review is we want a couple things to happen. One is there's a very interesting thing that you probably realize about human psychology is especially when it comes to software development, sometimes things that are complex, we can write them down, we can put them in binders, and we can come up with all these great things about what the software will do, but most people know it when they see it. And that's what this really is about. You asked us to do this. We worked with you, to understand it through the representative called our product owner, and we put this thing together. Did we actually do what you asked us to do? Because this is one of the shortcomings of waterfall, and this is one of the reasons that waterfall was problematic, was because we didn't have these feedback loops built into it. So you would work for 6 months, you deliver something at the end of 6 months, and then the business people would turn around and say, that's not what I wanted. Happened all the time. Is that a bad thing? It's a bad thing in waterfall. It's not such a bad thing in Scrum and Agile, because we want that feedback. Because again, I think one of the superpowers in the complex world is say, let me assume I didn't do what you wanted me to. I mean, imagine the chutzpah that it takes in project management, where we write down these requirements, 6 months ago, and assume we're going to deliver exactly what the people want. That's ego right there. I think it makes a lot more sense to say, hey, I'm going to do something small. I'm going to show it to you, and I'm going to make sure I'm headed in the right direction before I finish everything. So the second thing, and I think this is what Jim is going to emphasize, because he always helps me with this, is it's also, now that I've seen what you've done, I can, even if it is exactly what I wanted, which is great, I'm going to come up with a whole bunch of other things now that I've seen it. I'm going to come up with some more ideas, and we're going to capture those ideas in the sprint review. Because that's when you're most likely, your stakeholders are most likely to look at what you've done and say, oh, wow, this is great. Now can we do this, this, and this? Right? Did I get it right, Jim? Is that why you had your hand up? You're muted, my friend.
Yeah, I clicked on it. It's just slow to respond.
Yeah, well, that's...
There it is. Yeah, that's pretty close. Fred Fowler talks about this. People get confused about sprint review a lot. A lot of people think that it's a test of the software. It's proof. And in a way, yes, there is a moment of truth that either you've got it done, as you said, you got the work done, and we can show that it works. But that's not the primary purpose. The primary purpose is to say, what is the state of the product now?
Yeah.
And what should it be doing next? So you had said a little earlier, it's not for the product owner, but it is for both the stakeholders and the product owner, a chance to have that conversation, to inspect the product and to say, here's where we are. What do you think? What are the new ideas, and where do we go from here? So it's that feedback loop, and it's a two-way conversation, not just a, let me show you the demo, okay, check it off, and we move on. It's that conversation that says, let's all get clarity on where we are and where we go next.
Yep. That's why I didn't head it off completely, but thank you for clarifying. I figured that's why you had your hand up. Jim and I, we've done this before. Here's the thing. I really want to emphasize this. I like the concept of just 4 columns in my workflow, which is to do, meaning I haven't done anything, in progress, done, meaning that the developers are done, and then accepted. Because what that does, I'm not saying you have to do it. You don't have to do anything. Death and taxes, right? That's the only two things. But the reason I like accepted is it kind of is a nice little forcing mechanism for the people who have done the work to now, as soon as they're done, go get the product owner. And then get the work accepted by the product owner. And that to me means that that story, that piece of work is truly done once it's accepted. And the reason I want to grab the product owner, let's say I finish on day 3 of 10. I want to grab that product owner as soon as I'm done. I want to show the product owner and get them to accept or not accept it. Is I've got now another feedback loop built in. Because again, if I'm assuming I didn't do everything right, which is hard for us as human beings. But if I assume that maybe I didn't do everything right, now I can verify it with the product owner. And if there are changes that need to be made, if I do it on day 3, I've got 7 days to change it. What I see teams doing is they finish it on day 3. They wait until day 10 when the product owner comes back, and the product owner should always be there. They shouldn't have to come back for the sprint review. And then the product owner and the stakeholders say, this isn't what I wanted. That's problematic now. Because now I've lost the opportunity and I've doubled the cycle time, because now I have to work on it again in the next sprint and I have to bring it back to the next review. So it may take me twice as long to deliver it. And I'm going to talk a lot about cycle time, because Agile and Scrum, a lot of what we're doing is focusing on cycle time, because we're delivering the most value we can in the shortest amount of time. So you've just doubled your cycle time because you didn't grab the product owner in the middle of the sprint when the work was done and had that opportunity to make sure it was right. Okay, that's a big problem. So again, I'm not going to tell you everything about sprint reviews. I'm sure people have written books about them. I want to tell you about the things that I've found that are really important to understand. I'll tell you something else about, not doing the PowerPoints. Here's another problem with sprint reviews. It's like there's an old thing in live TV, don't work with dogs and children or something like that. Don't work with animals and children, because they do unexpected things. I mean, I'm a big fan of Agile and Scrum, obviously. But if I had to pick my least favorite thing, it's in some respects, it's the review, because I've just had so many instances where we're in the middle of the review and somebody screwed up an environment or something like that. And it just, things go haywire. But that's just my bias. A lot of times it works, but I just don't. It's really embarrassing when you get into a review with a bunch of stakeholders and something goes hinky with the database or something. So you really want to make sure that you have your ducks in a row. And so, I mean, that's a good forcing function as well, right? If I know I have to have my work reviewed, hopefully I'm making sure that it's reviewable. Right? So there's a little subtle forcing function on it. But that's all I really have to say. It's a pretty simple concept. Get the work done, get it accepted, and then when I get into the review, let's actually show the work to our stakeholders instead of showing them PowerPoint slides about what the work did. Even if it's back-end stuff. Here's the other thing that comes up quite a bit. This is back-end stuff, they don't care. I get that a lot. If they're your stakeholders, odds are they care. So show them everything and let them decide. Don't decide ahead of time. I've had that so many times where they've said that, and I said, show them anyway. And then at the end, I will ask the stakeholders in the review, what you saw this stuff as back-end stuff, was that important to you? Was it worth seeing? Because, if you don't want to see it, we're not going to show it to you in the future. We'll tell you about it, because you don't have to show everything. And they say, no, that's good. I want to see it. They care about that kind of stuff. Most of them do, because it's their product, right? It's their problem that you're solving. They want to know everything there is to know about it. That's probably it for me on the review. Pretty simple, actually. Finish the work, get accepted, show it to your people, Make sure that you understand it's a great opportunity for you, your product owner and team to get more ideas. Here's the other thing too. Let's say we get into the work has been accepted. We get into the review and the stakeholder says, that's great, but I wanted it in blue. Then people say, oh, well, do we open that story up again? No. Anything that comes out as a suggestion from the sprint review, it is a new item in your product backlog, and it will go through the same way, same process that every other item in your product backlog does, which is value, effort, and sequence. I liken it to zombies. I'm not a big zombie fan. There's so many zombie fans of zombie movies and everything, so I'm sure there's some zombie fans out there. How do you kill a zombie? You got to shoot it in the head, right? That's what happens when a story is accepted. Boom, you shot the zombie in the head. It can't come back to you. It's done. Forget about it. Make sense? Quick questions on reviews before I get into what I get into next. Let's get into retrospective next, I suppose. I'm not doing them in order, by the way. You know that because you're smart people. Let's talk about retrospective. The retrospective is for the team. The review is generally for the stakeholders and some of the rest of the organizations for the business. The retrospective is inspect and adapt in the sense of, okay, we're a team, we're doing things in a certain way. Are there things that we can do differently, maybe better, right? So for me, the biggest output and a successful retrospective to me is, have we, during this time that we've spent together, to talk about what we're doing and how we're doing it? Have we come up with different things to try? So the biggest piece in the complex world, again, getting back to this concept of complexity, is there are good things we know generally work, but there's no really set of best practices that if you only do these things, you're going to be correct. Because it is complex. Every team has a different context. Every team has a different maturity. Every organization has a different environment. Every organization's politics, et cetera, are different. So in order to be effective, there's not just certain things that teams can do that you can pick out of a recipe book. Fred and I were having this discussion last night. We mentioned a lot about Fred Fowler. He's the one who comes up with some of the scenarios, and then Jim has done some of those case study scenarios. And he's got a book coming out. We were talking about it last night. What we're looking for is not cooks. We're looking for chefs, right? A cook is good. I was a good cook. Being married for a long time, I'm good at following directions. That's what a cook does. But a chef understands the ingredients and can make adjustments and things accordingly. We want to create chefs with our team. We don't want to create cooks. We want to create people who can reflect on what's going on and what things might we do to improve it. But I really want to hit this thing hard, because in the complex world, you want to do experiments. You want to do, sometimes they're referred to as safe to fail experiments, because you do not know what inputs are going to lead to what outputs, because it's not a simple cause and effect thing. It's not that there's not cause and effect. It's just very, very difficult to judge cause and effect in the complex world. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to experiment. We want to try things. This is why Agile became a big thing. There was a bunch of people who said, hey, this isn't working, right? Retrospective, where are we today? This isn't working. This doesn't work well. Let's try something different. Okay, what are we going to try, right? And then they eventually came up with something like Scrum. And they came up with, other things. XP, extreme programming, things like that. What can we do differently to make things better? It's empirical. So the review being probably my least favorite of the ceremonies and events, the retro is probably my favorite. And they both happen at the end of the sprint. So I'm going to tell you what I do for what I would consider a vanilla retro. And that's what I usually do. There are whole books on retrospectives. There's a guy named Norm Kurth who wrote a book on retrospectives, I believe. But there's other folks, and you can look them up. Just go to Amazon, type in smile.amazon.com first, choose Job Hackers as your charity, and then type in retrospectives, right? There's all kinds of different things you can do. And there's creative ones. There's a lot of you folks who are very creative. A lot of you folks who have fun with doing things that are creative. It's just not me. I'm a brass tacks business, get down to the business kind of Scrum Master. I'm not the cool teacher where you can put your chairs in a circle and contemplate the meaning of the universe. I'm going to give you a very vanilla retro experience. But that doesn't mean it's going to be a bad experience. But I'm going to get down to what I consider to be the essence of it. But there's going to be some people who do interesting things, and maybe it gets, after a while, you've been together for a while, it gets a little stale. You want to experiment, right? Do different things. I've seen ones where, that people ask questions like, if this sprint were a car, what kind of car would it be? And there are Scrum Masters and facilitators who are really good at playing games. I'm not the games Scrum Master either. I'm just letting you know, because everybody's going to have you're going to have your own style. That's what being a chef is. Not being a cook. I don't want you to be cooks. I want you to be chefs. So the chef says, okay, what do I want to achieve? And what I want to achieve in a retrospective is I want to achieve some things that we're going to do differently for the next sprint. And whatever it takes me to get to that is what I'm going to do. And here's how I get to it. Sometimes more successfully than others. I had 2 retrospectives yesterday, so it's fresh in my mind. I do it in a series of steps. Number 1, I'm going to frame the retrospective. What? I'm going to say, why are we doing this, right? I'm always big on why. Why are we doing this as a team? Sometimes I've used, Norm Kurth has something called the prime directive. I don't know why my tablet doesn't want to work as well today. It's not all my fault. It doesn't give me my full screen. Prime directive, so you can look it up. Prime directive says, when we get to the end of something, we know more than we did at the beginning. It's something to be celebrated, blah, 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 blah. Basically, it frames it in this way. We need to be able to do certain things in the retrospective. One is we have to have this wonderful thing. I'm going to talk a bit about it over time. Is called psychological safety. We all feel like we contribute and we feel safe to contribute during the retrospective. So as a Scrum Master, I have to create that safety and that safe environment. And it's not something you can just do immediately, right? It's not like I can walk in the door and say, hey, just trust me, right? Trust has to be earned over time. So, sometimes when you're a new Scrum Master, your first couple retrospectives are going to be, pretty lukewarm. Because they got to trust each other and they got to trust you, right? In order to be able to say the things that need to be said. So I want to frame it and say, look, this is not about people. This is about the fact that I sometimes I said this probably twice yesterday. It's the Home Depot, what I call the Home Depot phenomenon. Home Depot phenomenon is you never go to Home Depot once when you have a project, right? You always think you're going to go once. You always think that you thought it all through. You always think that you're going to get everything that you need, and then you go to Home Depot and you get it, and then you start the project, and then you realize everything you didn't get, and then you go a second time. Sometimes there's a third time. Is that wrong? Is it bad? No, you're not a bad person because that happens. You're human. I see a bunch of people when I say Home Depot thing, and then I explain it. I say, well, a bunch of people, yeah. I go to Home Depot twice every weekend, right? Because when we start something, we start doing things, we learn more, right? This is the other conceit about waterfall, is that we can know everything up front. Oh, it don't work that way. We don't know everything up front. We know things as we start doing them, which is why in the Agile Manifesto, it says we're doing it. We're learning things by doing it, because that's what happens. You start doing the project and you realize all the stuff you forgot the first time. These are things to learn from. Maybe if you do this enough, gosh, maybe you don't have to go to Home Depot twice. Maybe you're some kind of, guru for home improvement. I want you working at my house. Okay, so this is stuff to celebrate. So you want to frame it so that people feel as much as possible comfortable in the fact that, look, this is not about particular individuals. We're not going to point out, hey, Joe, you did a crappy job of something. It's something that we can learn from, and it's something that we can actually, because now we're a self-organizing group and we're doing this meeting, we can actually do something about it. So that's the first part. That takes about 5 minutes or so, Takes me longer because I can never say anything in 5 minutes. You learned that already. Number 2, this is an important step. During your first retro, you're not going to have a history, but by the second retro, you're going to have a history. You're going to have something that happened before. And this is where you want to make sure you want to review the previous retro. I'm trying to write this nice. Mrs. Klink might give me a demerit for my penmanship. You want to review the previous retro. You want to say, here's what we talked about last time. And most importantly, here's the things we decided to do last time. Here's the experiments that we decided to do last time. Did we do them? Because one of the things I found is before I started doing this as the second thing in my retro, is we talk about a lot of stuff. We agree to do a lot of stuff, but we never really did the follow-up. It got so bad in Scrum that prior to the November 2021 or 2020 revision to the Scrum guide, they used to have a rule that from the retro, you had to have at least one item that you put into your sprint backlog to do, so that people wouldn't forget to do them, because they'd have the retro and they have all these great ideas of things that they're going to do and they never did them. So make sure that folks know that you're going to do this on a regular basis, and make sure that you do it on a regular basis, saying, hey, we decided, I'm going to come up with one. We decided we're going to pair program on a single story last sprint, right? During the last retro. Did we do it? Yes or no? If the answer was no, we didn't do it. As a Scrum Master, I can say, hey, we said we wanted to do it. I'm assuming we still want to do it. I'm going to put it on the actions for this sprint, and let's, for this retro, let's actually do it. And if we have to put something on the backlog, we'll put something on the backlog to remind us, right? Because what good is it coming up with an experiment and not actually doing it? The other question I'm going to ask is, okay, so we decided to do pair programming on one story in the previous sprint. That was our experiment. We did that experiment. What did we learn? Was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing? Should we do more of it? Right? So usually at that point, is do we continue with this experiment? Do we increase, make it bigger because we think it's working? Do we do some more? Or do we stop doing it because it didn't work? And just because it doesn't work doesn't mean it won't work. It just means it didn't work then. And a lot of it might just mean that the team, if you think about a team like a person, they all have different, what I would consider maturity levels and capabilities, right? I think in my book, I say, I think everybody should drive, but I don't hand the keys to my 10-year-old. Because there's a maturity level. So if test-driven development is a good thing, they try it, it doesn't work for them, doesn't mean that test-driven development is a bad thing. Maybe they're just not ready for it. Maybe they don't have the environment. Maybe they don't have the knowledge. Maybe there's something else we need to do, right? So we'll say, oh, we're going to do test-driven development on one story. How'd that work? God, it was a disaster. Good. What do we learn from it being a disaster? Because every experiment, unless you're not smart people, and you're all smart people, you're going to learn something from it. Well, we couldn't do test-driven development because we didn't have this particular whatever. Okay. Here's our action for the next one. Let's go out and get whatever you need. Right? We need to do X to the deployment pipeline. Okay. Can we do X? Should that be our experiment for the next one? I keep driving to what is the experiment? What are we going to do differently? Because if not, it's just a gripe session in a lot of cases. Let's talk about all the stuff that's not working out. Cool. What you can do about it? You know? Well, I just want to vent. Okay, well, that's cool. Doesn't really help us much. Step 3, I'm going to ask a few questions. Usually these questions are this. I'm going to put them up on a board. Usually what went well, things to improve, and then actions or experiments. I ran out of room here. Don't know why, I'm not at the end. Actions and experiments. And so what I'm going to do with them, and it depends on the team. Some people will do Post-it notes. Back when we were all working together, they'd say, okay, go write some stuff down, put it on Post-it notes, put it in the columns, blah, 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 whatever. What I'm usually going to try to do, because again, I'm looking for psychological safety, meaning, and I want to be able to gauge it, is I'm going to try to talk to them about it. I think right now I'm still not at that point where we just do the talking thing. Right now with a lot of my teams recently, because we're not co-located. I mean, we are, but we're not physically in the same room. I just give them some time and say, okay, write all the stuff that, you know, in this, things that went well. Think about the last 2 weeks. Think about the last sprint. And write down some of the things that went well. What were the good things that happened? This is important too. I think we want to start with the positive stuff. And this is the only time I'll say to them, guys, it's okay if you want to call somebody out. In fact, we do, with my teams now, we actually do 4 columns. We separated what went well into what went well, which is more of a team thing, and then what we call shout outs. So you could do 4 columns. We do 4 columns. So I say, okay, if you want to talk about a particular individual and it's a good thing, put it in the shout outs. You want to talk about what we did as a team, put it in the went well. You could do that too. It doesn't matter. Again, what we're trying to do at the first is we're trying to set the stage. We're trying to make sure that we did the follow-up, but now we're going to start a new cycle, and we're going to start with good stuff. There's a lot of reasons to do that, by the way, psychologically, because one of the things that we have a tendency to do as human beings is we have a tendency really to concentrate on the things that don't go well and not the things that do go well. But one of the things that's really interesting about leading people as opposed to managing people is the way you lead people is you lead with what they've done well, positive reinforcement, as opposed to telling them everything that they did wrong and then trying to fix some kind of defect in their character. Because that's what we really do, right? Because we have this bias that tells us if I do something wrong, there's a reason for it, but if you do something wrong, it's because you're a defective person, right? And starting off with basically, you know, you're a defective person is generally not a good place to start. Let's start off, we're good people. We've done some good things. Let's talk about those good things, right? And it may be about the experiments that you're trying. But you want people to feel safe, and they're going to feel safer too when you do this. So there's a lot of psychology in the fact that you're going to start out with, here's the things that went well. And you can spend some time doing it. Ultimately, what I'd like to be able to do, which I'm still not, again, with the teams I'm currently working with, and I don't think I'm telling any state secrets, so I don't think I'll get in trouble, but we're really not at that point. So I think we're getting close to it, where I can just say what went well, and then people will just speak up, and then I'll write it down for them. I prefer that because there's anonymity in just writing it in, typing it in, you know, online, right? And anonymity, if you have to have anonymity, do you have complete psychological safety? I don't think so, right? I want you to have that psychological safety that you can say something and own it. I have one team that's really, really close to that. Then I'm going to get into what can we improve. Now, it's rare, but it does happen where sometimes when we talk about things that are going well, I'm going to pay attention. I'm there. I'm going to pay attention. It's not just, I'm going to have them do it. But if they say something and I say, that's interesting. Do we need to do anything different in order to make sure that this continues? But you usually don't have to with things that went well. It's just kind of, positive strokes, which is great. And then they're going to get into, then we're going to hold them back. And then we're going to go into, okay, what are the things that didn't go so well? What are the things now that we, with this Home Depot principle, what did we learn about after our first trip to Home Depot? Now that we've done something, what do we know that we should have known at the beginning? And we could have probably done better. And there's always opportunities for that. And then we'll start filling them out. We had a problem with X, such and such. The system keeps going down every Tuesday night or something. I mean, they'll come up with, who knows what it's going to be. They're going to come up with a bunch of stuff. And then my goal again is to what? Get them to actions and experiments. So I'm going to take a look at all of these things that they say went wrong, and I'm going to start asking some questions about those things. What could we do in the next 2 weeks to maybe improve this situation? And that's where I really want to get to. What are your actions and experiments? Now, as a Scrum Master, and having done this for a long time, and you all will get to that place if you aren't there already, you're going to learn certain things as a Scrum Master because you're going to work with a lot of teams, you're going to work in your domain, and you're going to have certain suggestions and things. And I've heard, I've had other Scrum Masters and coaches say, well, you shouldn't make suggestions. I disagree with that. I think there's a lot of times that the teams don't know what they don't know, right? The classic unknown unknown. If you got a bunch of young developers, which I have a tendency to do because I'm getting older, so they're all younger than me now. But if you got a bunch of young developers who don't have a lot of experience, do they know about behavior-driven development? Do they know about test-driven development? Do they know about pair programming and mob programming? Do they know about clean coding and all these other things? Maybe they just went to a coding boot camp where they never taught these things, but they learned a language and now they got a job. So I don't think it's inappropriate if they have a problem where you think you might have a potential experiment or solution that you kind of make a suggestion, but that you have to play by ear, because if they don't trust you or you're new to them, that's probably not where you want to start, right? They've got to trust and respect you, and you got to earn that. Because if I come out of the gate and I tell you, this is the one thing I did with the 2 teams I have now. I didn't change anything, I think, during the first month and a half, 2 months. I just did exactly what the other Scrum Master did, and they did what they always did. I wanted that. I mean, I made some adjustments, but I tried to make them small because I didn't want people to be afraid of what I was doing. But once you get into a comfort level with a team, you should be able to say, here are some things that I've seen before. And they may ask you at a certain point. That's even better. But you want to get to the experiments. And if you know that, I'm going to talk about behavior-driven development, test-driven development, and software development. If you know those are good things, if you can help lead the group to making that decision to do some experiments in those realms, that's a great thing. You want to try to lead them there, right? Any leader would do that. If a leader knows that there's a better place for them to be, they would try to lead them to that better place. It just makes sense. But they need to be experiments, because here's the other thing that's going to happen, especially in the beginning, is you're going to write down, especially if it's a new team, you haven't done retrospectives for a while, you're going to have like 5,000 things that you want to improve. You're going to have a laundry list of things. You got to pick and choose. Which things are most important to solve now? Which things are, kind of, sometimes there's things out of your control, but which things can we do something with? And you'd be amazed at what you can do. Here's the key. I was talking about this, I forget who it was yesterday. I think it was Dave, the co-founder of Job Hackers. We have this thing called proportionality bias. I'm going to talk a lot about biases. But we have this thing called proportionality bias, where if we have a big problem, we assume that there has to be a big solution. But here's the beauty of the complex world. In the complex world, because of nonlinearity, small changes can have big effects. Asymmetric payoffs is what I refer to them as. I'm not the only one. I didn't make that up. But you have an asymmetric payoff. You have certain things where you can do a very small change and get a huge, huge reward. As a Scrum Master, you need to look for those things. Don't look for the big ones. It's not going to happen. Look for the incremental change, the small changes that have a big effect. And it could be, here's the other thing too, it's an experiment. An experiment means we don't know whether something will work or not. If we're doing a true experiment, we're going to try something. We're going to see if it works. And you need to go into that, but you don't want to boil the ocean. You don't want to eat the whole elephant, whatever metaphor you want to use. You want to pick something small. So if I'm going to use the example of again, go back to test-driven development. Test-driven development is something that's good. If I can get the team to say that we're going to do, Larry, we finally agree with you. You worn us down. It's only taken 2.5 years, but you worn us down. We're going to try something. You don't say we're going to do test-driven development for every story in the backlog from now until the end of time for everybody in the organization. That's what most organizations do, by the way. This is where they get it. This is where they're not optimal. I almost said get it wrong, but this is where they're not optimal. They want to make these blanket things. This is a best practice. Everybody must do it starting tomorrow. That's it. Forget about it. They don't care whether you're mature enough to handle it. They don't care if it's within your context. They don't care if it's within your environment. They just say you have to do it. And if you don't do it, we're going to punish you. That's not what we want to do. What we want to do is we want to say, let's do an experiment because it's safer to fail an experiment. Instead of saying we're going to do every story in the next sprint with TDD, what we're going to do is we're going to say we're going to take one story, 2 people, we're going to try TDD for that one story, those 2 people, we're going to come back at the end of the sprint, we're going to talk about it in the next retro. You get me? Small experiments and trying to find those small experiments that will have the big potential payoff. Because the other thing that's really interesting about continuous improvement, you all know, I'm going to talk a little bit about Warren Buffett. You all know Warren Buffett, right? He's a billionaire, right? Used to be the richest man in the world. Don't know what happened. He's a billionaire. In fact, I don't know about you all. I'm a big believer in capitalism to a certain extent, but I think once you make $1 billion, they should give you a plaque that says you won the game, and that's it. I'm going to tax you at 100% after that because you're killing society. You are. These people shouldn't exist. I mean, they should live, but billionaires shouldn't exist. Once you get to $1 billion, you're done. That's it. Game one. Anyway, he's a billionaire. Why is he a billionaire? Is it because he's getting these huge rewards every year? No, it's little ones. If you're an investor and you get 1% more than you would have gotten the year before, and then you compound that over about 30 years, right? That's the magic of compound interest. Don't you think compound interest works with knowledge and continuous improvement? If my team gets only 1% better each time for 2 weeks, where am I at the end of the year when I've had 26 opportunities to get 1% better? Am I 26% better? I'm way more than 26% better. If I can increase my knowledge by 1% every week, where am I at the end of the year? Where am I at the end of a decade? It's these small changes that can give us huge benefits, even if they're just small changes. But in the complex world, you can do one small change and you can have a huge return on your investment. And that's the nature of complexity. So this is where we need to take advantage of it, because really in the end, you don't have many opportunities to do this other than in the retrospective. And that's the important part. So you really need to get good at this as a Scrum Master and get good at facilitating this. I'd like to think I'm good at it because I know how important it is. But you have to, this is the most, for me, it's the most important piece. That and when we talk about, BDD and the story refinement. So that's it. That's all I have to say on retrospective. Then after I get through that, I'm going to do one thing at the end. And that is, I'm going to thank them. Often there's a phrase that came to mind. I forgot to say it, but one of the things I might say at the beginning is we have to, and this is true about anything in life, especially in complexity, especially as in diversity. Diversity is something we desire because we need the diversity of mental models and diversity of thought. But diversity is not easy. Psychological safety is safe, but safety is not easy. Disagreeing with somebody is not easy. Disagreeing and being not, and you not being disagreeable is not easy. But that's what I say, we have to do that. That's what we need to do. In all our organizations, with our teams, with our families, with society itself, we have to learn how to disagree without being disagreeable. But none of this is easy because we're not built for it. We're going to talk more about that, but we are not built for it. We are tribal beings, and we love to be right. We care more most of the time about being right, about the feeling of being right than actually finding out what is right. So we have to work hard to do that, right? We have to fight against sometimes our instincts to be right. We have to fight against our instincts to be tribal. There's a lot of things that we have to do in order to be successful in this complex world we live in, this diverse world we live in. So I want to thank them because I think it's important. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for coming to this particular ceremony with the right mindset of trying to improve what we're doing as a team and trying to improve what we're doing as individuals and as a company. And then I'll send them off on their merry way.